There is a cruelty that wears the face of logic. It does not arrive with raised fists or snarling teeth. It arrives with a calm voice and reasonable words and the collective agreement of powerful people who have decided, without asking you, what you are worth. It arrives dressed as wisdom. It sits in council chambers and speaks of bloodlines and strength and the future of kingdoms. It looks at a girl who stands 5 feet 2 inches tall and cannot shift into her wolf, a girl who has spent her entire life inside a body the pack considers broken, and it says, with great certainty and no hesitation at all, she is not enough. Her name is Rosie Vale. She is 20 years old. She is small and quiet and has never once in her life been given the room to be anything else. She is the daughter of the greatest strategist the Orm pack has ever produced, a man the kingdom celebrated in life and forgot in death, leaving his daughter to navigate the wreckage of his absence with nothing but the maps he left behind and the mind he gave her. She cannot shift. She has never shifted. In a world built entirely on the power of the wolf within, this makes her, by every official measure, nothing. Tonight is the mating moon ceremony. Tonight, the goddess will declare her fated mate. And tonight, in front of every pack lord, every council elder, every wolf in the great hall of Goldenmere Castle, the man the moon chose for her will look at her small frame and her still human skin and decide that the goddess made a mistake. What happens next will shatter everything, including him. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you are already hooked in on today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We like to know our pack members from all over the world. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The great hall of Goldenmere Castle smelled of roasted meat and ambition, and Rosie Vale was invisible in it. She sat at the far end of the lower bench, the place where the pack's lesser members gathered, the ones without rank or wolf status or the specific gleaming confidence that came from never having been made to feel small, and she watched the room with the quiet, comprehensive attention that had been her only real defense for as long as she could remember. She was good at watching. She had learned it young, after her father Aldrich had died and the pack's memory of his greatness had proven considerably shorter than its appetite for finding someone to look down upon. The Vale name, once spoken with reverence in Goldenmere's halls, had become something people said carefully, if they said it at all, the reminder of a brilliant man attached now to a daughter who couldn't shift, couldn't fight, couldn't do any of the things that made a wolf worth acknowledging. She had adapted. Watching was safer than speaking. Understanding a room was safer than being seen in it. She had catalogued every patrol rotation in the Eastern Territory, identified 3 structural vulnerabilities in the castle's western wall, and privately solved the supply chain problem that had been bleeding the pack's winter stores for 2 years, all without saying a word to anyone, because to speak was to invite attention, and attention led to the question everyone always ended up asking eventually. But can she shift? No. She could not shift. Her wolf was there. She felt it sometimes, a warm pressure behind her sternum, a low hum of awareness that sharpened her senses and quickened her instincts, but it had never broken through. The healers had no explanation. The elders had plenty of opinions. And Rosie had learned to live inside the specific loneliness of someone who carries something extraordinary that the world around her has decided to read as defective. Tonight was different from other nights. Tonight was the mating moon ceremony. She had been telling herself, for weeks, that she was not hoping. That she had realistic expectations. That the bond could choose anyone and she would accept whatever came with the grace of someone who had long practice at accepting things that hurt. She had been lying to herself. Obviously. Comprehensively. In the way that only people who are hoping very much can lie to themselves. Still sitting alone, little ghost? The voice came from her left. Petra Harlow, ranked wolf, copper-haired, the specific kind of beautiful that had never been required to develop a personality. She settled onto the bench beside Rosie with the proprietary ease of someone claiming territory. The ceremony starts in an hour. Petra's eyes swept Rosie with the practiced assessment of someone cataloging a threat and finding it insufficient. Are you actually expecting something to happen tonight? For you? Rosie looked at the map she'd been studying, the patrol route, the 7-minute gap at the Northern Creek bend that nobody had addressed for 3 months. I'm here because attendance is required, she said. Petra laughed. The sound was soft and dismissive, the laugh of someone who finds something too small to bother being cruel about. Right. She stood, smoothing her gown. Don't get your hopes up, Vale. The goddess doesn't waste good bonds on broken vessels. She walked away. Rosie looked back at the map. Her hands were completely steady. She had learned that too, how to receive a blow and not let it show on her face. How to keep the trembling internal where no one could use it. She was so focused on the map that she almost missed the moment the great hall doors opened and a cold wind moved through the room. Almost. She looked up. And the world reorganized itself around a point she had not been prepared for. He was standing at the hall's entrance with 12 warriors at his back, and the Orem Pack's collective response to his presence was a kind of stunned, hostile silence that told Rosie everything about who he was before anyone said his name. Tall. Broad. Dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been carved by someone who took difficulty seriously, strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that were not brown and not gold but something between the two that caught the torchlight like a predator's in darkness. He wore no formal court dress. Just dark leather and iron, the armor of a man who had decided that his presence was statement enough without decoration. He moved through the hall with the unhurried certainty of something that does not need to assert its danger because its danger has never been in question. His name, when it rippled through the crowd in a wave of urgent whispers, landed in Rosie's ears like a stone dropped into deep water. Riven Cole. Alpha King of Ironvale. The rival kingdom. The one Orem's council had been watching with the specific anxiety of people who know they are being outpaced and cannot afford to admit it. Riven Cole, who had taken Ironvale's fractured territory and rebuilt it in 5 years into something that 3 of the 5 kingdoms now regarded with open wariness. His eyes swept the room. Standard assessment. The kind that powerful men did on instinct, reading exits, reading threats, reading the political landscape of a gathering before committing to a position within it. They crossed her. Stopped. For exactly 3 seconds, the Alpha King of Ironvale looked at Rosie Vale across 30 feet of crowded stone floor. Something happened that she had no framework to explain. A pressure in her chest, sudden and specific. Her wolf, the presence she had carried silent and still for 20 years, lurched forward with a force that left her breathless. Then he looked away. His expression had given nothing. He was already continuing his survey of the room, already moving toward the council elders with the political composure of a king executing a diplomatic obligation. Rosie pressed her hand flat against the table. Her heart was hammering. Stop it, she told herself. It was nothing. He looked away. She was still telling herself this when the ceremony began. Caden Marsh was everything Rosie had ever been told a future Alpha King should look like. He was tall and golden and moved through rooms with the specific ease of someone who had never once walked into a space and wondered if he belonged. The heir to the Orem throne, 24 years old, trained since birth for the weight of the crown he would one day wear. She had watched him from a distance for years, the way the court arranged itself around him, the way even the senior council members adjusted their posture when he entered. She had not, in all that time, exchanged more than a dozen words with him directly. She had not allowed herself to think too carefully about what the ceremony might mean. When the High Elder called her name alongside his, she felt the hall hold its breath. Caden Marsh, heir to the Orem throne, and Rosie Vale, daughter of Aldrich. She stood. Her legs were steadier than she expected. She looked at him across the ceremonial circle. He was looking back. And what she saw in his face, just for a moment, before the courtier's composure reassembled, was the specific expression of a man receiving news he had not wanted and was already determining how to manage. Not joy. Not recognition. Not the bond's warmth blooming in his eyes the way the story said it would. Management. No, something inside her said. No, please. Caden stepped forward. Not toward her. To the center of the circle, facing the assembled court. His posture was the posture of someone making a prepared statement. Her heart began to sink before he opened his mouth. My people. His voice rang through the hall with the practiced resonance of someone trained to command rooms. Tonight the goddess has named my fated mate. He turned. His blue eyes found hers. They were not unkind, exactly. That was what broke something in her, they were not even unkind. They were simply certain. The eyes of a man who had made a decision he considered rational and was executing it cleanly. She has named Rosie Vale. The hall was silent. And tonight, his voice did not waver. Not for a single syllable. I, Caden Marsh, heir to the Orem throne and future alpha of this pack, must respectfully decline the goddess's choice. The silence fractured. She is small. Each word landed with the clinical precision of a blade. She cannot shift. She has demonstrated no wolf ability of any kind in 20 years of life. She carries no power I can verify, no strength this throne requires, no quality that would serve the Orem line. He looked directly at her. I do not doubt the goddess's intention. But I doubt this woman's fitness for the role she would be asked to fill. The Orem pack requires a Luna of power and capability. Rosie Vale, with respect, is neither. With respect. The bond snapped. It was not metaphorical. It was physical, a tearing in her chest, clean and total, the specific agony of something divine being dismantled by something human. Rosie heard a sound leave her body that she did not recognize as her own voice. Her knees hit the stone floor. The hall erupted into chaos around her, voices, movement, the shocked murmur of 500 wolves processing something none of them had ever witnessed. She pressed both hands to her sternum and tried to breathe through a pain that did not seem to have an outside edge. Small, he had said. Cannot shift. No verified power. Everything she had been told she was. Everything she had spent 20 years trying to outrun. Said in his voice, in front of everyone, ratified by the nod of every council elder who had always believed it. She was on the floor of Goldenmere's great hall, and the goddess's bond was in pieces, and the hall was spinning, and she could not find the bottom of this feeling to push off from. Then the temperature in the room changed. A presence, moving. Through the chaos and the shouting and a specific roaring agony in her chest, she felt it, a stillness at the center of the storm, approaching with the unhurried certainty of something that has decided. She looked up. Riven Cole was crossing the floor. Chapter 2. The silence that fell when Riven moved was different from the silence of shock. It was the silence of an entire room understanding simultaneously that something was about to happen that it could not stop. He walked through the parting crowd with 12 Iron Veil warriors moving at his flanks, not rushing, not threatening, simply present with the absolute, unmistakable intention of wolves who answered to someone who has never needed to announce his authority. His gold-brown eyes were fixed on Rosie where she knelt on the stone floor, and his expression was the expression of a man who has made a calculation and found it simple. He stopped before her. She looked up at him from the floor. Her face was wrecked, she could feel it, the specific aftermath of the bonds breaking visible in every line of her, and she had no resources left to perform composure. She looked at him with everything showing. He looked back at her. And then he spoke, not loudly, not for the room, but in a voice low enough that she felt it more than heard it, and what he said was, "You don't have to stay on the floor." It was not what she expected. Nothing about the next 30 seconds was what anyone in Goldenmere's great hall expected. He reached down and offered her his hand. She stared at it. Large, calloused, utterly certain. The hand of someone who was not performing an offer but making one, giving her the choice to take it or refuse it without loading either option with consequence. She took it. He helped her to her feet with a steadiness that absorbed all her unsteadiness, and then he did not release her hand, and the hall was completely, ringing silent. Rosie Vale. Her name in his voice sounded different than it had in anyone else's. Like a fact rather than a category. Daughter of Aldrich Vale. Pack strategist of Orem. His eyes held hers. The bond your Pax heir refused is not the only bond available to you tonight. Caden's voice cut across the hall. Ironvale has no standing. The mating moon does not recognize standing, Riven said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Caden. He looked at Rosie. The bond is severed by mortal hands. But power does not disappear, it simply waits. And what I feel, he paused, something moving briefly across his controlled expression before he managed it back. What I have felt since I walked into this hall is not nothing. The words landed in Rosie's chest like something landing in water, displaced, rippling, real. This is a declaration, he continued, still only to her. Not a claiming. Not a political move. Something shifted in his eyes. A question. Answered only if you choose to answer it. The hall was so quiet she could hear the torches hiss. Rosie looked at the man who had just called her a broken vessel in front of everyone she knew. Then she looked at the man kneeling his kingdom's pride before her without hesitation. She thought about staying. About what staying looked like. About 20 more years of the lower bench and the whispers and the map she'd been studying alone. She looked at Riven Cole. Ask your question, she said. Something moved through his face. Brief. Profound. Gone before she could name it. Then he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a formal declaration, recognized across all 5 kingdoms, witnessed by every wolf in the hall, and said. Will you come with me? Goldenmere erupted. Caden's voice rose above the chaos, something about insult, about violation, about the political consequences, and Rosie heard none of it because Riven's hand was warm around hers and his warriors had formed a circle around them and the bond that had been torn out of her chest 30 seconds ago was being replaced by something else. Not the same thing. Something newer and more uncertain and altogether more terrifying. We're leaving, Riven said quietly to her. Not a command. An offering of direction in a moment that had no other clear path. Rosie looked once more at Caden across the chaos of the hall. His face was, she catalogued it clinically, because this was what she did, because understanding things was safer than feeling them, not angry. Not relieved. Confused. The specific confused expression of a man who has made a decision he was certain about and is encountering, for the first time, the possibility that certainty is not the same as correctness. She looked away. Yes, she said to Riven. Let's go. They were 2 hours outside Goldenmere, the stronghold's lights long swallowed by the dark tree line, when the carriage slowed to a walk and the cold of the journey settled properly into Rosie's bones. She had not cried. She was not going to cry. She had spent years training herself out of crying in front of people and she was not about to undo that work now, in a carriage belonging to a king she had met approximately 40 minutes ago. But her hands were shaking. She was staring at them, willing them to stop, when the carriage door opened and Riven swung inside, not the door opposite, but hers, folding himself onto the bench beside her with the unhurried ease of a large man who has decided that proximity is appropriate and has no particular anxiety about making that decision. He did not speak immediately. He simply reached across and covered both her shaking hands with one of his. The warmth of it was startling. She had not realized how cold she was until that warmth arrived. His palm was broad and steady, and he held her hands with a gentleness entirely at odds with the iron composure he had worn in Goldenmere's hall, the gentleness of someone choosing, deliberately, to be careful with something. "You don't have to be all right yet," he said. Quietly. "Just for the carriage." Rosie looked at their hands. "I know," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He didn't move away. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances or politics or the careful management she had expected from a king making a strategic move. He simply sat beside her in the dark, his hand warm over hers, and let the road unspool beneath them. She fell asleep somewhere in the second hour, her head listing sideways without her permission. When she woke, briefly, just before the carriage slowed for the night's rest stop, her head was against Riven's shoulder. He had not moved. His arm had come around her at some point, she could feel the weight of it, careful and still, the arm of someone who had adjusted slowly enough not to wake her and had stayed very deliberately still ever since. She closed her eyes again without speaking. His thumb moved, once, in a small circle against her arm. "I see you," it said. "Rest." She did. Chapter 3. She woke to the smell of pine resin and wood smoke. Not the sweet, cultivated warmth of Goldenmere's hearths. Something older. Rawer. A fire that had been burning in the same stone hearth for generations, built by people who understood that warmth was not decoration but survival. Rosie lay still for a moment and took inventory. She was in a bed. A real one, deep furs, heavy wool, the specific warmth of a space that had been designed by someone who took comfort seriously. The room around her was timber and stone, its walls carved with patterns that she recognized, after a moment, as topographical maps. Not decorative. Functional. Routes and terrain features worked into the very walls of the space so that someone waking in this room would immediately understand the land they were standing in. Her chest ached. The bond's severance, already a distant throb rather than the acute agony of the previous night. The body healed faster than the spirit. She was learning that. A knock at the door. Then, without waiting for an answer, the door opened. The woman who entered had the specific bearing of someone who had been a soldier before she became anything else. Dark-haired, sharp-featured, moving with the compact efficiency of someone who had learned that fluid motion was more dangerous than aggressive motion. She carried a tray with food and water and set it on the chest beside the bed without ceremony. "The Alpha King wishes to see you when you're ready," she said. Her voice was neutral, not hostile, not warm. Professional. "My name is Marin. I am his beta." "How long have I been asleep?" Rosie asked. 14 hours. Marin's eyes assessed her briefly, not cruelly, but with the rapid competence of someone determining fitness for duty. "You were in shock. Your body needed it." Rosie sat up. "Where are we?" "Ironvale. The Alpha's stronghold." Marin paused at the door. "The Ironvale pack is not Goldenmere. We do not judge by size or by shifting status here." She said it without particular emphasis, as if it were simply a fact requiring acknowledgement before the conversation could move forward. "Eat. Then come." She left. Rosie looked at the tray. Then at the carved walls. Then at her own hands, small, pale, entirely human in their appearance. The hands that had never sparked with wolf fire, never extended into claws, never carried the visible proof of power that the world she came from required. She thought about what Marin had said. "We do not judge by size or by shifting status here." She ate. She stood. She walked out to find the Alpha King of Ironvale and begin understanding what she had walked into. He was in the war room. She found it by following the sound of a conversation that had the specific cadence of people talking about things that mattered, not the performative strategizing she had sat outside of in Goldenmere's council chambers, but something real and operational and treated with the seriousness of people who understood that the outcomes of their decisions had consequences. The door was open. Riven stood at the head of a long table covered in maps and reports, his dark leather exchanged for a plain linen shirt, his dark hair pulled back. Without the formal court context, he looked younger, or perhaps simply more real. The golden brown eyes were the same. The contained, specific intelligence of his expression was the same. He saw her in the doorway. The conversation in the room did not stop, but it changed register. The 3 council members around the table looked at her with the rapid, practiced assessment of wolves evaluating an unknown quantity. "Give us a moment," Riven said. They filed out without audible objection, though one of the elder council members, white-haired, sharp-eyed, let his gaze rest on Rosie for slightly longer than was comfortable before he went. The room was quiet. Riven did not move from his position at the table. He simply looked at her across it, and the space between them had the particular quality of something that had not yet been defined and was waiting to be. "Sit," he said. "Please." She sat. He sat across from her. For a moment neither of them spoke. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Rain had begun outside, she could hear it against the high windows. "You want to know why," she said. Not a question. "I want to know many things," he said. "I thought you should go first." She looked at him. "You claimed me in front of 2 kingdoms. A woman your rival just publicly dismissed as weak and unfit." She kept her voice even. "That was not nothing to give up. I want to understand what it was for." He was quiet for a moment. His honesty, when it came, had the quality of something he had decided in advance to give completely or not at all. "The political advantage was real," he said. "A blow to Goldenmere's standing. Evidence that their heir's arrogance damaged them in front of witnesses." He held her gaze. "I will not pretend that consideration was absent." "But," she said. "But I would have done it regardless." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table. "When I walked into that hall, I felt something I have not felt before. A recognition." His jaw tightened slightly. "I am not a man who acts on instinct without analysis." I had analyzed it by the time he finished speaking. A pause. The analysis agreed with the instinct. Rosie looked at the table. Then back at him. "I cannot shift," she said. The words came out flat. Direct. She had long since stopped softening them. "I have never shifted. Your council will have opinions about that." "They do," he said. "And you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I watched you process what happened to you in that hall with the most controlled emotional response I have ever seen from someone experiencing something that devastating," he said. "I watched you get to your feet when every instinct in the room expected you to collapse. And when I offered you my hand, you looked at it for 2 full seconds before you took it, you waited, even then, even in that state." He paused. "Your wolf is not absent, Rosie. It is waiting. Whatever keeps it contained, that is not weakness. The thing that survives everything you have survived without breaking is not weakness." The fire crackled. Something in Rosie's chest that had been clenched for approximately 20 years made a small, cautious movement in the direction of loosening. "I will not be a political asset," she said quietly. "I understand the situation. I understand what I represent to your kingdom's position. But I will not be a piece moved around a board." "Good," he said. "Because I don't need a piece. I have plenty of pieces." He looked at her directly. "I need someone who sees the board differently than I do." The rain increased against the windows. "Tell me about your father's maps," he said. And the conversation that followed lasted 4 hours and changed both of them in ways neither of them could yet articulate. It was past midnight when she finally rose to leave. The fire burned low between them, both of them still leaning over the table as though drawn there by the maps themselves. Riven walked her to the door of the war room. It was a small thing, a few steps across stone, but he did it with the specific attention of someone who considers even small gestures worth doing properly. At the threshold he paused, and she turned to find him looking at her with an expression she didn't yet have a name for. "Your room has everything you need," he said. "But if it doesn't," he stopped. Started again. "You are not a guest here, Rosie. You are not a political arrangement. Whatever you need, you ask." A beat. "You ask me." The directness of it landed somewhere undefended in her chest. "I will," she said. He nodded. And then, before she could move, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face, a gesture so brief and careful it might have been imagined, except that the warmth of his fingertips against her temple was entirely real. He said nothing. He simply looked at her for one more moment, as though committing something to memory. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Rosie," he said. She walked back to her room with her hand pressed to her own cheek, where the warmth of his touch still lingered like a question she didn't know the answer to yet. Chapter 4. 3 weeks into Irondale, Rosie understood several things. The first was that Riven Cole had not been exaggerating about his counsel's opinions. Elder Voss, in particular, the white-haired, sharp-eyed man who had watched her leave the war room that first morning, made his position clear in the specific way of someone who has decided that transparency is more useful than pretense. "She cannot shift," he said, in her presence, at the first formal council session she attended. "The Luna of Irondale must be able to lead in battle. That is tradition. That is necessity." "Tradition serves the pack," Riven said, without looking up from the document he was reviewing. "When it stops serving the pack, it serves nothing. With respect, Alpha King." "Noted," Riven said. The word closed the conversation with a finality that did not require volume. He looked at Voss. "Rosie Vale will be present at all council sessions. Her contributions will be treated with the same weight as any other council members. If anyone disagrees with that position, they are welcome to bring their disagreement to me privately." Nobody brought their disagreement privately. But the cold shoulder Rosie received in the corridors was eloquent in its own way. Marin, however, had been unexpectedly honest about it. "They're afraid," the beta said, on the morning of the second week when she found Rosie standing outside the library with a stack of Irondale strategic reports that she'd been working through. "Not of you specifically. Of what you represent." Riven claiming a wolf who can't shift is a statement about what he values in leadership. It challenges assumptions that the council has built their authority on for 30 years. "Does it challenge yours?" Rosie asked. Marin looked at her. Something shifted in the beta's expression, a brief, assessing openness that replaced the professional neutrality. "I watched you on that floor in Golden Mirror," Marin said finally. "I watched you take the hand of a stranger from an enemy kingdom while you were bleeding from a bond severance. I watched you ask to understand his reasons before you agreed to anything." She paused. "No. It doesn't challenge mine. It was the beginning of something. Not friendship yet, both of them were too measured for that to be fast, but the foundation of it." The second thing Rosie understood was that something was shifting between her and Riven, quietly and without either of them naming it. It happened in the small accumulations. The way he always poured her tea before his own at the end of long council sessions, without being asked, learning within the first 3 days exactly how she took it. The way he positioned himself, in every room they shared, between her and whatever door was at her back, not hovering, not obvious, just present, the particular positioning of someone whose instincts had quietly reorganized around a new priority. The way he looked at her when she was speaking, with the full and undivided attention of someone who had long since decided that what she said was worth hearing completely. It was late on a Thursday, she had lost track of the specific date, which had never happened to her in Golden Mirror, when she fell asleep at the war room table over the Border Patrol analysis. She knew she had fallen asleep because she woke, some time later, to the sensation of warmth being settled around her shoulders. Riven's cloak. He had draped it over her without waking her. He was standing at the window now, his back to her, reviewing a dispatch by the last of the evening light, having apparently decided that the work could continue and she could rest, and both of these things could be true at the same time. She watched him for a moment in the quiet. His profile in the fading light. The particular set of his shoulders when he was thinking, not tension, just focus, the stillness of a very large mind at work. The way he turned a page with the same precise care he brought to everything. I am in considerable trouble, she thought. She did not say it aloud. But something in the quality of her silence must have changed, because he turned from the window, and found her watching him, and the expression that crossed his face before he managed it back was the expression of a man who is also in considerable trouble and is also not saying it aloud. They looked at each other across the war room in the last of the light. You should sleep properly, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Not at the table. I know, she said. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then he crossed the room and offered her his hand. The gesture she had come to understand was his language for things he didn't have other words for yet, and walked her back to her room through the quiet corridors of Ironvale, his hand warm around hers the entire way. At her door, he lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, deliberate, unhurried, his gold-brown eyes on hers over the gesture. Good night, he said. She stepped inside before she said something she couldn't take back. The third thing she understood was that Golden Mirror was not finished with them. Reports came in through the second week. Border movements along the southern edge. Diplomatic pressure on Ironvale's trade alliances. The specific machinery of a kingdom preparing to demonstrate that it had not been diminished. Rosie sat in the war room every morning with the reports spread in front of her and her father's voice in her head, the memory of him bent over maps, his finger tracing possibilities, his quiet, precise assessments of what arrogant men would do when cornered. They always favor the direct path, he had told her once. The route with the most glory. Pride is a strategist's greatest gift, because it makes the proud predictable. She was working through the Border Patrol reports on the morning of the 15th day when she found it. A note in the original Ironvale land survey, 3 generations old, annotated in the margin by some forgotten cartographer with more attention than ambition. The Thornwall Ridge carries sound. A voice at the eastern foot becomes a roar at the Silver Pass summit. Consider implications for communication and detection. She stared at the note for a long time. Then she looked at the patrol routes. At the Golden Mirror border movements. At the specific, repeated emphasis on the Silver Pass approach in every report she'd read. They're not preparing to attack, she thought. They're preparing to listen. She found Riven in the training yard and said, I need to show you something. He looked at her face. Stopped what he was doing immediately. Good, she noted. He read urgency correctly and responded to it correctly. That mattered. She showed him the map and the note and the patrol analysis, and watched his expression shift through recognition into the specific sharp attention of someone connecting pieces they had been looking at separately. They're using the Silver Pass as an ear, he said. They've been monitoring your movements for weeks, she said. The border patrols aren't a threat. They're a surveillance operation. They're waiting for you to move your main force before they hit the eastern supply lines, he said. While the defense is focused north. His golden eyes were intense on her face. Your father taught you this. My father taught me to see what people don't want you to see, she said. It's the most useful skill he gave me. Riven looked at the map for a long moment. Then at her. What do you propose? He asked. Something warm moved through Rosie's chest. Not the fragile, tentative warmth of the past 3 weeks. Something more solid. The specific warmth of being asked the right question by the right person. A counter-deception, she said. We give them exactly what they're listening for. They worked through the night to build it. Side by side at the war table, the map spread between them, the fire burning low and then lower. Riven thought in systems, in the military language of force and counterforce, in the logistics of moving men and resources across difficult terrain. Rosie thought in patterns, in the psychology of what an overconfident enemy would assume, in the specific blind spots that pride created. Together they built something neither of them could have built alone. It was 3 a.m. when Rosie reached across the table to point at the secondary ridge position, and her hand landed directly on top of his. Neither of them moved. The fire crackled. Rain moved against the windows. The map lay between them, half-finished, the night's work spread across it in ink and intention. Slowly, Riven turned his hand over. His fingers laced through hers on the map table. He looked at her. Not the calculating assessment. Not the political composure. The look of a man who has stopped pretending he doesn't feel what he feels. Rosie, he said. Just that. Her name, in his voice, with all its weight. She looked back at him. The fire in the hearth. The ink on his hands from hours of work. The particular quality of his stillness when he was waiting for her to lead. When this is over, she said quietly. When Goldenmere is handled and the council is settled. Yes, he said. Not a question. A promise. His thumb moved against the back of her hand, that same small circle she had felt in the carriage, weeks ago, in the dark. The language beneath language. I am here. I am not going anywhere. Take whatever time you need. She turned back to the map. But she did not take her hand from his. They finished the plan like that, his warmth steady against her palm, her voice low and certain naming positions and movements, his voice answering, and by the time the fire had burned to coals they had built the most elegant trap she had ever conceived. She hoped her father could see it. Chapter 5. The plan worked. That was the extraordinary thing, the part that made Rosie's hands shake slightly when it was over, not from fear but from the specific adrenaline of watching something you built in your mind become real in the world. Irondale's decoy force moved north with exactly the noise level calculated to carry along the Thornwall Ridge to Goldenmere's listening posts. The actual Ironvale garrison stayed in position, invisible. Goldenmere's flanking force, which had been positioned to strike the undefended eastern supply route, walked into a quiet field with no supply route and a lot of waiting wolves. No bloodshed. No battle required. Just the complete, clean exposure of a strategy that had been weeks in the planning. Riven found her on the outer wall when the last report came in confirming the Goldenmere retreat. He didn't say anything. He simply came to stand beside her where she leaned against the parapet, looking out at the valley below, and the warmth of him against her side in the cold evening air was its own kind of language. After a moment, he turned to face her. His hands found her face, both of them, palms cupping her jaw with the specific reverence of someone handling something precious, and he looked at her for a long, wordless moment. That was extraordinary, he said. Low. Rough. Only for her. It was my father's strategy. It was yours, he said. The mind that held it, built it, applied it, that is yours. Do not give it away. She looked up at him. The last of the evening light caught the gold in his eyes. Then he leaned down and pressed his mouth to her forehead, a long, deliberate press, his lips warm against her skin, his hand still cradling her face as if she were something he intended to keep safe, and held it there while the evening settled around them. It was not a kiss. It was something older than a kiss. The specific gesture of a man placing the full weight of his attention on a person and meaning it to be felt. Rosie's eyes closed. She felt the warmth of it move all the way down through the cold of the evening air, down through the ache in her chest where the old bond scar still occasionally pulled, down to something deeper that had been waiting for exactly this, not for rescue, not for saving, but for someone to look at her and simply say, "I see you. All of you. And I am not going anywhere." "Riven," she said. Against his chest, because at some point she had stepped into him and his arms had come around her and she had stopped caring about the strategic implications of any of it. "I know," he said. Into her hair. They stood on the wall while Ironvale's valley lit up below them, the pack celebrating in the warm squares of window light, and she let herself be held by a king who held her like she was the most important thing in the room. For the first time in 20 years, she believed it. The trouble came, as trouble often did, precisely when she had let herself stop expecting it. A letter on the war room table. The Interkingdom Council's seal. Riven standing at the window with the set of his shoulders that she now recognized as his default posture when managing something he had not wanted to manage. "The Interkingdom Council has summoned us," he said. His voice was measured. Professional. "They want us to answer for the actions at Golden Mere. The disruption to the ceremony. The political implications of my counterclaim." "We'll go together," she said. "I can prepare the argument for." "I'll handle it," he said. The silence that followed had texture. "I'll handle it," she repeated carefully. "Not we." He turned to the window again. "The council will be hostile. The questioning will be aggressive. I need to manage the political." "Riven." She kept her voice even, though something in her chest was tightening. 2 weeks ago you told your council that my contributions would be treated equally. Last night we outmaneuvered Goldenmere's entire intelligence operation with a strategy one built. And now? Now the stakes are different," he said. Quietly. Without looking at her. "The formal council has the authority to dissolve bonds by ruling them politically destabilizing. If they determine that my claim creates more instability than it resolves, then we argue that it doesn't," she said. "Then I argue that it doesn't." He finally turned. His golden eyes were unreadable in the way they only were when he was working very hard to make them unreadable. "You are not going before the council. It is not safe. I am not a piece to be protected on a shelf while you." "This is not negotiable," he said. The bond went quiet. Not broken. Not torn. But thin, stretched to the specific thinness of something being held too tight in the wrong place. Rosie looked at him for a long moment. "I see," she said. She turned and walked out. She did not go to her room. She went to the library, and she sat in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest and breathed through the specific feeling of something she had allowed herself to hope for revealing its limits. She heard Marin's footsteps before the door opened. Marin sat beside her without ceremony. "He had a conversation with Boss today," the beta said. Not unkindly. Not as a weapon. As information she judged Rosie needed. Voss presented him with a formal council petition. 50 signatures. Requesting that the bond be submitted for review on the grounds of strategic instability. A pause. Riven rejected the petition. Immediately. But Voss's argument was that if the bond could be shown to be the primary provocation for Goldenmere's aggression, then I become the problem, Rosie said. Her voice was very quiet. "He doesn't think that," Marin said. "What does he think?" Marin was quiet for a moment. "He thinks that if you're present at the council hearing, they'll use you as a lever. Your shifting status. Your Goldenmere origin. They'll construct you as a liability and force him to choose between defending you and defending the pack." She paused. "He's trying to remove the lever. By removing me from this situation. By protecting you from a room that wants to hurt you." Rosie stared at the bookshelf across from her. Pride is a strategist's greatest gift, because it makes the proud predictable. The question is whether you're talking about your enemy's pride. Or your own. She stayed in the library until the fire burned low. Then she went to find him. He was in the war room, standing at the table with his hands flat on the maps and his head bent, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a confrontation he knows he deserves. "I don't need to be protected from a room," she said. "I need to be trusted in one." "I know," he said. "I know that." He crossed toward her and stopped just before her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and the expression on his face was stripped of every layer of composure. "What I said to the council was probably necessary," she said. "I'm not here about that." She held his gaze. "I'm here because you went cold on me and I needed to understand why, and now I do. You're afraid the council will use me to break what we're building." A pause. "But Riven, if you protect me by hiding me, you prove their argument. You prove that I am a liability rather than a strength." His jaw was tight. His eyes were anguished. "Let me come to the hearing," she said. "Let me stand beside you and let them ask their questions. And watch what happens when they ask them." He looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, as though the decision cost him something and he was paying it anyway, he reached out and tucked her hair back from her face, the same small gesture from her first night in Ironvale, the one she had thought about more times than she would admit. His hand stayed at her jaw. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, careful and deliberate. "The bond one severed my rival's claim to form," he said quietly, "is the most politically complicated decision I have made in 5 years of kingship." "I know," she said. "I have not regretted it for a single moment," he said. The war room was very quiet. "Neither have I," she said. He reached across the map table. His hand, palm up, open, the same gesture as the great hall of Golden Mirror. "Not a demand. An offering." She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and he pressed his mouth to her knuckles and lingered there. "Together, then," he said. Against her skin. "Together," she agreed. Chapter 6. The council hearing was 3 days away when Rosie found the wolf who didn't belong. She had been doing what she always did in the quiet hours, walking the Ironvale stronghold's corridors with the maps of it building themselves in her head, cataloging details that didn't require conscious effort anymore. She knew the building the way she knew her father's patrol routes, not because she had memorized it deliberately, but because paying attention was automatic, and the details had simply accumulated. The wolf was in the eastern storage corridor. Not doing anything obviously wrong, just standing, ostensibly checking inventory. But Rosie had learned the storage rotation by the end of her first week, and the night shift didn't include anyone assigned to that corridor on a Wednesday, and the way the wolf was standing was the standing of someone waiting rather than working. She committed his face and walked past without acknowledging him. 2 hours later, she was in the library with the incident laid out in her mind beside everything else she had been tracking. Voss's petition, with its 50 convenient signatures. The border movements that had been just slightly too well timed. The storage corridor wolf, standing in a place he had no reason to be. The pattern that formed was not comfortable. She went to Riven. He was in the weapons hall with Marin, reviewing the guard rotation for the council hearing. He read her face as she came through the door and stopped what he was doing. "Say it," he said. "I think we have an informant," she said. Inside the stronghold. The silence that followed was a different quality from any previous silence. Rosie laid out everything she had. The timing correlations. The storage wolf. The petition with its inexplicably rapid 50 signatures, signatures from people who had been in multiple different locations, who could not logically have all signed the same document in the 24 hours between Voss presenting it and submitting it. The petition was pre-prepared, she said. Someone was ready for the council to move against the bond. They just needed the right moment. She looked at Riven. Someone in this stronghold has been feeding information to Golden Mirror. And the petition was not the first action. Someone with access to the war room, Riven said. The three of them looked at each other. She watched the thought cross Riven's face before he could stop it. Watched it cross Marin's face a second later. Watched both of them recognize it and attempt to close it away. The specific expression of people who have just thought something they don't want to have thought. I know what you're considering, she said. Her voice was very steady. I need you to hear me clearly. I am not the informant. No, Riven said immediately. I know that, Marin said, at the same time. But she had felt it through the bond, that half-second of doubt, involuntary, gone as quickly as it arrived but not before she felt it. The specific cold of being considered. Even by people who didn't believe it. You have my trust, he said. The words came out with a weight that told her he understood exactly what he was committing to. I hope so, she said. Because I think things are about to get considerably worse before they get better. She was right. The evidence appeared 2 days before the council hearing. A leather satchel, found hidden behind a stack of winter stores in the eastern storage corridor. Inside, hand-sketched maps of Ironvale's stronghold. Patrol routes marked in a deliberate hand. And beneath them, a small carved token in the shape of Goldenmir's golden wolf. Marin brought it to Riven. Rosie was in the library when the bond went quiet. Not the warmth withdrawal of their earlier tension. Something sharper. A specific, acute silence that felt like something deliberate pressing against the door between them. She went to find him. He was in the war room. The satchel was on the table. Voss among the council members present, his expression carrying the specific satisfaction of a man who has been proven right. Rosie looked at the satchel. At the maps. At the Golden Mirror token. She looked at Riven. His face was controlled. Completely. His golden eyes were on hers, and what she saw in them was the worst thing she had felt since Golden Mirror, not hostility, not certainty, but the specific, agonized expression of a man fighting a doubt he had promised himself he would not feel and is losing. I didn't put that there, she said. I know, he said. But his voice was wrong. Too careful. Riven. The satchel was found in the east corridor, Voss said, his voice smooth and deliberate. The corridor that the Luna visits regularly during her evening walks. For the safety of this pack, Riven said quietly, pending investigation, you will. No. She turned to him. Her voice did not break. She would not let it break. You told me you trusted me. 2 days ago. In this room. You gave me your word. The satchel is planted. She stepped closer to him. Close enough that the bond between them was almost audible in the air. And you know it. Some part of you knows it. You can feel me through this bond, Riven. You can feel that I am telling you the truth. His jaw was iron. His eyes were anguished. A king's feeling, Voss said softly, cannot override material evidence. Riven looked at her for a long time. One day, he said. His voice was the voice of someone paying an enormous cost. The East Wing. While the investigation runs. One day, Rosie. He stopped. I need to be certain. The bond did not break. But it went so thin and cold and quiet that the silence of it was worse than breaking. Rosie looked at him for one long moment. Then she walked past the council members without a word, her head up, her spine straight, and let the door close behind her. Chapter 7. Certainty, Rosie had found, came from the places you weren't expecting. She sat in the East Wing room, not a cell, she noted, because he had not made it a cell, had not locked the door, had not posted a guard, had simply asked and she had agreed because she understood the politics even as they gutted her, and she thought about Voss. About the specific patience of him. The 30 years of practice. The petition with its pre-gathered signatures. About the storage wolf, who she had seen and catalogued without understanding why. She thought about what her father had said about traps. The best ones look like evidence. The perfect frame is one that asks the people who know you best to choose between what they know and what they see. She thought about the golden mirror token in the satchel. Carved. Specific. The kind of detail an enemy operative would include to make the frame complete. And then she thought about something else. She had grown up in Goldenmere. She knew Goldenmere's sigils the way she knew the Pax patrol routes. She knew the current version of the carved wolf token, had seen it on council members' desks, on official correspondence. The token in the satchel was 3 generations out of date. She sat with that knowledge for approximately 2 minutes. Then she went to find Riven. He was in the war room, staring at maps without seeing them. His face when he saw her was the face of a man who has been sitting with shame and is not entirely certain he deserves relief from it. The token, she said. The golden mirror carving in the satchel. What did it look like? He frowned. A wolf. The Orm wolf. Seated, with a crown. Goldenmere changed their sigil 12 years ago, she said. The current version is the wolf in mid-leap, uncrowned. The seated wolf with the crown hasn't been in official use since before I was born. She came to the table and put both hands flat on it. Whoever planted that satchel used an old sigil. Someone who knew Goldenmere's historic imagery but not their current one. Someone who isn't from Goldenmere. She looked at him directly. It's an inside job, Riven. His golden eyes were very still. Boss, he said. The petition was pre-prepared, she said. He's been building toward this since before we arrived. He needed me removed from the council hearing. And he needed you to be the one to remove me. Riven looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved. Not toward the door. Toward her. He crossed the war room in 4 strides and stopped before her, and his hands found her face, both palms, cradling her jaw, and his eyes were raw with everything he had been managing for the past 18 hours. I should not have, he began. Not now, she said. Deal with Voss now. I am going to deal with Voss, he said. I need 1 moment first. His forehead came down to hers. His eyes closed. His breath was uneven, the specific unevenness of someone who has been very controlled for a very long time and is briefly allowing themselves to stop. I felt your truth through the bond, he said. Low. Rough. And I chose the evidence. I was afraid and I chose political safety over the certainty I had promised you. He exhaled. There is no version of that I can justify. I know, she said. I am sorry, he said. Not the composed apology of a king. The simple, direct sorry of a man who has done something wrong and is not going to dress it up. I am so sorry, Rosie. She looked up at him. Then she reached up and covered his hands with hers, his hands still at her face, and held them there. Now go, she said softly. Deal with Voss. Something moved through his expression. He pressed a single, fierce kiss to her forehead. Then he turned and went. She was in the library when Elder Voss walked in. She had exactly 2 seconds to understand what she was looking at, the specific clarity of a man who has decided the indirect approach has run out of road. Something in his hand that caught the firelight wrong. A blade. Silver-edged, old, the kind that was ceremonial until it wasn't. A shame, Boss said. His voice was very calm. You were clever, girl. Closer than anyone has come. He crossed the room toward her. But cleverness without a wolf is just a woman in a room. Rosie backed up one step. Her hand found the edge of the bookshelf behind her. Goldenmere promised me the eastern trade routes, Boss said, almost conversational. 30 years of serving this pack and watching Riven dismantle everything his predecessors built. Then he brings in a wolfless outsider and calls her equal. He'll lose the hearing anyway, Rosie said. Her voice was steady. Buying time. Her fingers moved along the bookshelf's edge. The sigil error in your planted satchel is already documented. Something flickered in his face. She pressed it. The fire, she said, louder, a change of subject sudden enough to make him track the movement of her eyes to the hearth, and in the half-second of his misdirection she pulled the iron bookend from the shelf and threw it at the stone chimney breast. The crack of iron on stone was sharp and loud in the small library. Boss startled. His lunch was half a second late. The door burst open. Riven. For Ironvale guards behind him. Marin a step ahead of all of them. The blade came at Rosie anyway and she threw herself backward, not graceful, not trained, purely instinctual, and felt it slice cold past her shoulder without connecting, and then Boss was on the floor with Marin's knee in his back and 2 guards on his arms and Riven was across the library in 3 strides with his hands on Rosie's face and his golden eyes doing something she had never seen from him before. Not the controlled assessment. Not the careful management. Fear. Raw, structural, the specific fear of someone who has almost lost something before they fully understood what they had. I'm not hurt, she said immediately. I know, he said. His voice was not steady. I know. I know that. His hands were on her face, warm and slightly shaking. I heard the sound and the bond went, he stopped. Rosie. I'm not hurt, she said again, softly. He pressed his forehead to hers. They stood like that in the library while Voss was being restrained behind them, and his breathing was not entirely even and she could feel through the bond the specific aftermath of someone who has been running towards something and arrived one step ahead of catastrophe. I should have believed you, he said. Against her forehead. Low. Just for her. Yes, she said. You should have. I was afraid, he said. The political exposure, the council, the petition. I was afraid and I let the fear choose, and I chose wrong. I know, she said. I felt it. A pause. And I understand it. It does not mean it didn't hurt. I know, he said. Good, she said softly. Neither of them moved for another moment. His hands came properly around her, both arms, drawing her against him, and she let herself be held in the warm, solid certainty of him while the fire crackled and the guards secured Voss and the world outside the library continued without them for just a little while. His mouth found her hair. Her temple. The curve of her cheek. Not urgent, something slower and more deliberate than urgency, the touches of a man reminding himself that what he was afraid of losing is still here, still real, still warm against his hands. Together, he murmured. Against her cheek. Together, she answered. Then Marin's voice, careful and professional, Alpha King. Boss is ready for questioning. Riven pulled back. His hand stayed on her face for one more second, deliberate, a statement, before he released her. They walked out side by side. Chapter 8. Boss's confession, once he understood that the sigil error had already been documented, was comprehensive. 3 years of intelligence sharing with Goldenmere. Patrol rotations, resource allocations, strategic planning notes accessed during his legitimate council activities. The ambush on the decoy force had been his. He had modified the communication stone used to coordinate the strategy, introducing a delay that had allowed Goldenmere's secondary force to reposition before the counterplan could complete. The ambush that had killed 4 Ironvale warriors and wounded 9. Riven heard the full confession with the stillness of someone who is managing something very large by making it very small and contained. Rosie stood beside him and watched his face and felt through the bond the specific, cold weight of a king receiving the knowledge that his pack had bled because someone in his own house had sold them. When it was done, he gave the orders quietly and without ceremony. Then he walked out. She found him on the balcony. The night was clear, the moon full, cold, the kind of white light that made everything look like it had been paused. He stood at the railing with his hands flat on the stone, looking out over the Ironvale Valley, and his back was the back of someone carrying something that had gotten heavier than expected. She came to stand beside him. Not touching. Just present. For wolves, he said. Because I didn't see what was in my own counsel. You couldn't have. I should have. His voice was not angry. Worse than angry. Certain, in the way of someone holding themselves to a standard. It was there. The petition was too fast. The signatures, I noticed the timeline and I let Voss explain it away because he's been my senior council member for 8 years and I trusted the relationship over the math. He exhaled. 4 wolves. Yes, she said. She did not offer comfort, that would be a lie. 4 wolves. They stood in the quiet. The hearing is tomorrow, she said finally. Yes. I want to be there. I know. He turned to look at her. His golden eyes were tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the tiredness of someone who has been holding something rigid for a long time. And you will be. A pause. The council will push on the shifting status. Let them, she said. He looked at her. Riven. She turned to face him fully. The moonlight was cold and honest and she let it be. I have been answering the question of what I am without a wolf my entire life. Every room. Every assessment. Every person who looked at my size and my inability to shift and decided they already knew the conclusion. She held his gaze. I am done being afraid of the question. Tomorrow I am going to that hearing and I am going to tell the truth about what I am. And the truth is that I am the person who found the informant in your house, planned the strategy that humiliated Goldenmere's intelligence operation without a single casualty, and identified the frame in time to save this kingdom significant damage. She let that sit for a moment. If the council can look at that record and still conclude that I am unfit, then their judgment is the problem. Not me. Riven looked at her. Something in his face moved, slow, profound, the specific movement of a man receiving something he has been holding himself back from. I have something to tell you, he said. She waited. When I walked into Goldenmere's hall, he said, I felt the bond before I saw you. A recognition that I had no framework for. I looked for you, my wolf was directing me specifically, deliberately, across a room full of wolves, to one person. He paused. When I found you, you were studying a patrol map. Alone. In the darkest corner of the hall. Something moved in his expression. I watched you read it for 30 seconds before I understood what you were doing. You were solving a problem that Goldenmere's entire military council had not solved. With no authority, no resources, no recognition. Because the problem existed and you could see it. She was very still. I claimed you because the bond demanded it and the strategy enabled it, he said. That is the truth. I have told you that truth and I don't unsay it. He stepped closer. But here is the other truth. The truth I have been carrying since that hall and have been too careful to say directly. His voice dropped. I claimed you because when I saw you alone in that corner with that map, I felt something I have never felt in my life. The specific recognition of someone who is the same kind of thing you are. Someone who lives in the gap between what the world thinks they are and what they actually are. And I knew, with the same certainty that I know terrain and strategy and the particular quality of air before a storm, that I did not want to leave that hall without you. The moonlight was cold and clear. That, she said softly, is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. I have been afraid, he said, of saying things that are honest. Because honest things can be taken and used. I know, she said. He reached out, the same gesture, always the same gesture, palm up, the question that was never a demand. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers and she felt through the bond the specific warmth of something that had been being careful for weeks, deciding it was finally safe to stop being careful. He drew her closer, not quickly, giving her every opportunity to read his intention and step away if she chose, until she was standing against him in the cold night air with his arms around her and his chin resting on her hair. Together tomorrow, he said. Together, she said. It was deep in the night when she found she could not sleep. She had lain in the dark for an hour with the hearing turning itself over in her mind, the arguments arranging and rearranging, the bond between her and Riven humming steady and warm through the wall between their rooms. She had not intended to go to him. She was still deciding whether she was the kind of person who did that, who walked toward the thing she wanted rather than waiting at a safe distance to see if it came to her. She went. His door was unlocked. She pushed it open. He was awake. Of course he was awake. He was sitting at the window in the moonlight with the same dispatch he'd been turning over for days, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking at it, and thinking about something else entirely. He turned when she came in. He didn't ask why she was there. He didn't say anything at all. He simply looked at her in the moonlight, her hair down, her feet bare on the cold stone, all the armor she wore in daylight hours left in her room, and his expression was the expression she had been waiting for. The one with nothing managed in it. She crossed the room to him. He stood, and when she reached him his hands found her, one at her jaw, one at the curve of her waist, with the unhurried certainty of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finally decided the patience has been paid. Rosie, he said. Low. Rough. Her name in his voice, weighted with everything he'd been carrying. She pressed her palm flat to his chest, feeling the beat of his heart, faster than his composure suggested, as it always was when it was just the two of them, and looked up at him. I'm not going to the council hearing alone, she said. And I'm not going through the rest of whatever this is alone, either. Something broke open in his face. Not devastation. The other kind of breaking, the kind that is actually an opening. He kissed her. Not carefully. Not with the precise management he brought to everything else. With the full and unheld attention of a man who has been holding something back for weeks and has finally, completely, let it go. She kissed him back with the same ferocity. They stood in the moonlight and held nothing back, and when he finally pulled away it was only to press his forehead to hers and breathe, both of them, the specific breathing of people who have just told the truth with their whole bodies. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met, he said. Against her forehead. Not a declaration designed for a room. A simple fact, given with both hands. She laughed, surprised by it, the laugh catching her off guard the way real laughter always did, and felt him smile against her skin in answer. He pulled back just far enough to look at her. Stay, he said. Simply. Plainly. The request of a man who does not attach conditions to his wanting. Not because of the bond. Not because of the council. Because I want you here. She looked at him in the moonlight. Yes, she said. He drew her toward the window seat, settled her against him with the practical tenderness of someone who has thought about how to hold this particular person properly and has opinions about it. His arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest, the dispatch forgotten on the floor, the Iron Veil Valley spread silver below them. He talked to her, quietly, about the hearing. Not strategy, he knew the strategy. About the things he had not been able to say to anyone, about the weight of the decision he'd made in Goldenmere's Hall, about the specific loneliness of a king who is accustomed to calculating everything and has finally done something he cannot fully calculate. She listened, and then she talked, and he listened, and somewhere in the second hour she fell asleep against his chest with his hand moving slow circles against her back, and he stayed awake a little longer, watching the moonlight shift across the walls of his room, and understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has stopped running from a conclusion that he was going to love this woman for the rest of his life. He pressed one more kiss into her hair. Then he closed his eyes and let himself sleep too. Chapter 9. The Interkingdom Council hearing lasted 6 hours. The council was exactly as hostile as Riven had predicted, and exactly as manageable as Rosie had promised. They asked about the shifting status. She answered, directly, completely, with the full record of her strategic contributions to Ironvale laid beside her shifting status as factual context, letting the council do the math themselves. They asked about her Golden Mirror origins. She answered, the sigil error, the petition timeline, the evidence chain that had led to Voss's arrest, all of it documented and presented with the cool precision of someone who has spent her whole life preparing for exactly this kind of room. They asked, once, whether she believed a Luna without wolf power could defend a kingdom. Rosie looked at the council member who asked it. I believe, she said, that the question assumes the only value in a leader is the ability to shift and fight. I would like to present the case that the 4 Ironvale warriors who died in Voss's coordinated ambush would be alive today if Ironvale had been led exclusively by its strongest shifters. She paused. They died because someone in their pack sold information to an enemy, because the pack's intelligence analysis was less developed than its combat capacity. That is not a wolf power problem. It is a different kind of problem. And it is the kind of problem I solve. She met the council member's eyes. I do not argue that Ironvale doesn't need wolves who can fight. It does. What I argue is that it also needs what I provide. And that the two things are not in competition. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room processing something it had been told to dismiss and is finding harder to dismiss than expected. Elder Voss's confession, submitted as evidence, was the thing that ultimately shifted the vote. 7-3 in favor of recognizing the bond. Riven squeezed her hand under the table when the vote was announced. She squeezed back. Outside the council chamber, in the pale afternoon light, Rosie stood in the courtyard while Riven spoke with the dissenters and felt something she had not felt in 20 years of carrying a wolf she couldn't release. Solid. Grounded. In her own skin, in her own territory, in a space where her specific shape of existence had been argued for and won. That was extraordinary, Marin said from beside her. The beta's voice contained something that might, from Marin, qualify as warmth. The moon goddess question. A pause. I have been asked that question 17 times in my career. No one has ever answered it like that. My father taught me that the best answer to a loaded question is one that makes the questioner realize they were asking the wrong thing, Rosie said. Smart man. He was, Rosie said. I wish he could have seen this. I imagine, Marin said, he would have already known it was coming. Riven found her afterward on the steps of the council building, watching the courtyard empty. He didn't say anything. He sat beside her on the steps, the Alpha King of Ironvale, on the steps like any ordinary person, and the warmth of his shoulder against hers was the warmth of someone who has decided that proximity is the most honest thing he can offer. After a moment, he took her hand. 7-3, she said. 7-3, he agreed. She looked at the empty courtyard. At the afternoon sky. I want to go home, she said. Not Golden Mirror. The other home. The one with the carved walls and the wood smoke and the war room that smelled of maps and long nights and 2 people building something together. He stood and drew her up with him, and he kept her hand all the way back. Chapter 10. The battle with Golden Mirror came, as most inevitable things did, when it was almost but not quite expected. Alpha Marcus Marsh, in the weeks following the council hearing, had made the specific error of a powerful man convinced that the political solution had failed and only the military one remained. He moved his forces south along the Thornwall Ridge, the same ridge that had been Rosie's first strategic contribution to Iron Vale, and the movement was exactly as predictable as her father had taught her powerful, pride-driven commanders always were. They always choose the most glorious route. The one that tells the story they want told about themselves. Rosie was in the war room with Riven and Marin when the scout reports confirmed the route. "He's using the high pass approach," she said. "Direct. Visible. Maximum impact." "Which is exactly what we have been waiting for," Riven said. They looked at each other across the map. The strategy they had built over the past 3 weeks, the two of them, late nights and quiet mornings and the specific pleasure of thinking with someone who thought differently and better for the thinking together, was not a strategy of force. It was a strategy of geography. Of patience. Of using Goldenmere's predictability against itself. "The Northern Canyon," Rosie said, tracing the route. "When his vanguard reaches the second ridge, Marin's unit pulls back. Not retreat, bait. They follow." She looked at Riven. "And then?" "The flanks," he said. "Both of them, simultaneously. With the canyon walls carrying the sound of the horn," she said. "They'll think they're surrounded by twice as many wolves as they are." Marin looked at the map. "The psychological effect alone breaks the formation," Riven said. "A formation already overextended from the high pass approach." He looked at Rosie. "It's elegant." "It's my father's," she said quietly. "I just applied it." Riven looked at her. "It's yours," he said. "The mind that recognized it is yours." The battle itself was 3 hours. Shorter than most battles of its scale, which was precisely the point. Goldenmere's forces were not inferior fighters, they were simply fighting the battle they had planned to fight, in the terrain that favored the defender rather than the aggressor, against an opponent who had known their route before they'd confirmed it themselves. Caden Marsh fought well. Rosie had expected that. He was genuinely capable, and had never been a coward, whatever else he was. She watched from the ridge command post and felt, when the Goldenmere forces finally broke formation and sounded retreat, something she had not anticipated. Not triumph. Not vindication. Pity. He had been so certain. So calm in his certainty that she was insufficient. And that certainty had led him here, to a retreat from a battle he had been sure of winning, watched by the woman he had publicly rejected standing at the Alpha King of Ironvale's right hand. She hoped the weight of it was instructive. Alpha Marcus, unhorsed and surrendered to Marin's unit in the canyon, had the look of a man encountering the specific consequence of having built his entire strategic calculation on the assumption that the opponent he was dealing with was as predictable as he was. The subsequent negotiation was Rosie's domain. She laid the terms with the same directness she brought to everything, Goldenmere's southern trade routes held by Ironvale's oversight for 3 years, in exchange for full cessation of hostilities and the formal dissolution of Voss's intelligence arrangement. Caden, who had taken his father's surrender with the expression of a young man watching everything he thought he understood fall away, listened to the terms in silence. At the end, he looked at Rosie. "You found the sigil error," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My rejection was political," she said. "I know. I have always known." She held his gaze calmly. "You were not wrong that I couldn't shift. You were wrong about what that meant." A pause. "I hope the distinction is clear to you now." Something moved across his face. Not the cold certainty she remembered from the ceremony. Something more human. More costly. "I think it is," he said. "Yes." She nodded. Turned away. walked back to where Riven was waiting at the canyon's edge, and did not look back. He was watching her come toward him with the expression she had stopped trying to catalog and had simply learned to live inside of. The one that was entirely hers. The one that said, without words and without management, that there was nothing in his field of sight more worth looking at. She reached him. He pulled her in without ceremony, one arm around her, the side of his face against her hair, the specific hold of someone who has been watching someone walk through something difficult and wants them to know they do not have to walk away from it alone. "Well done," he said. Low. Into her hair. She exhaled against his chest. "Let's go home," she said. The night after the battle, the Ironvale stronghold smelled of wood smoke and the specific warmth of a building full of people who had survived something together and were beginning to understand what it meant. Rosie was on the balcony when it happened. She had not planned it. She had been standing in the cold night air watching the valley lights come on one by one and thinking about her father and the maps and the long strange road from Goldenmere's lower bench to here, when she felt something inside her shift. Not metaphorically. Her wolf moved. Not the familiar low-level hum she had always carried. Something larger, deeper, more certain, arising from somewhere very far down that had nothing tentative in it. She gripped the balcony railing and closed her eyes, and for once in her life she did not try to manage it or understand it or fit it into a framework. She just let it rise. The shift, when it came, was nothing like she had been told to expect. It was not violent. It was not painful. It was the specific sensation of something that had been held back for a very long time being finally, completely released, like a tide that has been waiting on the wrong side of a wall finding the wall gone. The wolf that emerged was small, as she was small. Silver white, almost luminous in the dark. And fast, the kind of speed that came not from size but from precision, from knowing exactly where every foot landed and why. She stood on 4 paws on the balcony stone and looked at the valley below and felt everything, the night air with its 100 distinct scents, the specific heartbeat of every living thing within a quarter mile, the bond with Riven blazing in her chest like a second sun. The door behind her opened. She turned. Riven stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face was the expression she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, to see on someone's face her whole life. Not surprise. Not assessment. Not the rapid recalculation of someone encountering something they hadn't expected. Wonder. Pure and uncomplicated and real. She shifted back. He crossed the balcony and stood before her, and his hands found her face with the certainty of someone who has finally stopped being afraid of what they're reaching for. "I knew," he said. His voice was rough. "I knew it was there. From the moment in Goldenmere when your wolf surged toward mine, I could feel it. Waiting. It was waiting," she said. "I think it needed somewhere safe to come out." He looked at her for a long moment. "I love you," he said. The words arrived without preamble or qualification, in the specific direct manner of Riven Cole deciding that the cost of not saying something has finally exceeded the cost of the vulnerability of saying it. "I have been refusing to say that for weeks," he continued, "because the timing was wrong or the situation was complicated or there was a political crisis requiring management. And I have been a fool, because the reason I was refusing to say it was fear, and I have spent this entire experience learning what it costs to let fear make my decisions." She looked up at him. The moonlight and the bond and the silver warmth of the wolf she had finally found, all of it present simultaneously. "I love you," she said. Simply. "I think I started loving you somewhere around the 3rd hour of our first conversation, when you asked me about my father's maps as though the answer genuinely mattered to you." He pulled her in. Not the careful, managed embrace of the past weeks. Both arms, fully, the hold of someone who has finally stopped calculating the risk of holding on. She pressed her face against his chest and felt his heartbeat and the bond blazing between them. He kissed her then, slowly, thoroughly, with the patience of a man who intends to memorize this, and when he finally lifted his head to look at her, his gold-brown eyes were the warmest she had ever seen them. "Tell me what you see from up here," he said into her hair. She looked out at the valley. At the lights. At the specific warmth of a kingdom that had been offered something fragile and had, slowly and not without cost, chosen to be worthy of it. "Home," she said. His arms tightened. "Good," he said. "Because I have no intention of being anywhere else." They stayed on the balcony until the cold became too much for her, which he noticed before she said a word about it, turning her toward the door with one hand warm at the small of her back, and then he drew her inside and they sat together by the fire and he held her hands in his and pressed his mouth to her knuckles one by one, the way he had done that very first night in Golden Mere, and looked at her across the firelight like she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever been given, the privilege of seeing clearly. She thought about the girl at the lower bench. About the 20 years of being told she was insufficient, broken, not enough. She thought about what it cost to outlast everyone who had been so certain of what you were. It cost everything, she thought. And it was worth every single piece of it. 6 months later. The Valley of Iron Vale held its first unified celebration on a night in early autumn, when the last of the harvest warmth still clung to the stone walls and the fires burned amber in every window of the stronghold. Golden Mere representatives sat beside Iron Vale council members at tables that had previously been separated by generations of rivalry, and the negotiation of the trade route oversight had, in its practical implementation, created more economic benefit for both kingdoms than the previous arrangement had for either alone. Rosie had predicted this. She had included it in the original terms document, footnoted, in the specific manner of someone who knows they are right and has learned to demonstrate rightness through outcomes rather than argument. Riven had read the footnote at the time and said, quietly, "You're doing that thing where you solve the next problem while the current one is still in progress." "I learned it from my father," she had said. "He would have liked watching you do it," Riven had said. She had needed a moment after that. He had given it to her without comment. At the celebration, she stood on the balcony with Marin, who had become, in the preceding months, the specific kind of friend that was built not on warmth alone but on mutual respect and the shared history of people who had survived something significant together, and watched Riven navigate the political gathering below with the ease of someone who had found his footing. "Caden Marsh is here," Marin said. Rosie watched him across the courtyard. He moved differently than he had in Golden Mere, less of the golden, unearned ease. Something more considered. "Does it?" "No," she said. Not with bitterness. With honesty. "It doesn't." Marin was quiet for a moment. "Your wolf came out silver," she said. "Yes. I've only ever seen silver once before. Old bloodline. Rare." Marin paused. Aldrich Vale was silver. Rosie looked at her. "Your father's wolf," Marin said quietly. "I was young when he came to Iron Vale once for a trade negotiation. I remember the color of it." She paused. "You carry more of him than just his maps." Rosie was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I think I was always going to. I just needed somewhere safe enough to become it." Below them, Riven looked up from his conversation. Found her immediately, the way he always found her, with the specific accuracy of someone for whom it was automatic, for whom the question of where she was had always been answered before it was consciously asked. He smiled. Not the rare, controlled thing she had been collecting for weeks. The full one, the one she had earned, slowly and at considerable cost, the one that was entirely hers. She smiled back. Marin said something politely tactful about needing to check on the supply arrangements and departed with the specific grace of someone who has learned when to give people their moment. Riven came upstairs. He found her where she always was, looking out at the valley, seeing its patterns and possibilities and the slow work of something being built, And he came to stand behind her with his arms around her waist and his chin at her temple, and they looked at it together. "The Eastern supply arrangement needs revisiting," she said. "The numbers from the last quarter don't account for the winter variance, and the oversight will." He laughed. Low and warm against her temple. The laugh she had earned, the one she kept as carefully as everything else he had given her. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you are allowed to simply be here." She considered this. "All right," she said. "Tonight I am simply here." He pressed his mouth to her temple. Her cheek. The corner of her jaw. Small, deliberate punctuations, each one its own complete sentence. "I see you. I am here. I am not going anywhere. You are home." She leaned back into him and felt the bond warm and constant between them, and looked out at the valley of Iron Vale, lit soft in the autumn evening, full of wolves who had learned what it meant to be led by someone who saw differently than they did. She thought about a girl who had sat at the lower bench of a pack that had decided what she was worth before she had finished becoming it. She had been wrong, that girl. About most of it. About the king who would save her, about the bond that would fix her, about the specific shape the future would take. But she had been right about one thing, always, even when she had not been able to prove it yet. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. She had simply been waiting, in the maps and the quiet hours and the long careful work of watching rooms, for the world to create the conditions in which everything she was could finally, completely, become visible. It had. And it was, as it turned out, considerably more than anyone had expected. Including her. From the upper balcony of Ironvale's stronghold, looking out over a valley lit warm and steady in the evening air, the Alpha King of Ironvale stood behind his Luna with his arms around her and listened to the sound of two kingdoms learning, slowly and not without difficulty, what it meant to build something together. The bond between them hummed warm and constant and whole, the sound of two halves that had been shattered and scattered and had found each other at the end of a very long dark. Not by fate, exactly. By choice. Every single day. Thank you for sticking around till the very end, my story family. If this story touched your heart, click subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think. Which moment moved you? Do not forget to share this story with your family and friends, and I will see you in my next story.